November 1942, Copenhagen. Thick fog drapes the narrow streets like a moving curtain. A German officer walks alone, boots striking wet cobblestone. He never registers the danger. There is no warning sound, no flash, no shout. One instant he is breathing, the next he collapses face first into the street. The people nearby do not even turn their heads. By the time anyone realizes he is dead, the man who fired the shot is already blocks away, disappearing into the gray city with the murder weapon hidden inside his sleeve. The device that ended the officer's life does not resemble a gun in any traditional sense. It looks more like discarded industrial tubing than refined machinery. Crude, plain, almost absurd in its design, it is anything but harmless. This unassuming cylinder is the Welrod pistol, the quietest and most lethal clandestine firearm of the Second World War. Built not for battlefields, but for alleys, stairwells, bedrooms, and cafes inside occupied Europe. The Welrod was never designed to change the outcome of a major engagement or influence the movement of armies. It existed for a different kind of warfare entirely, the invisible war of intelligence, sabotage, and targeted killing. It served the resistance and the secret agents who operated without flags, uniforms, or recognition. Its battlefield was the human nervous system itself. Its mission, the removal of individuals whose continued existence threatened underground networks. Long before it ever entered production, British intelligence faced an uncomfortable truth. For all the bombs, paratroopers, and commando raids being planned, there was no reliable way for an agent deep behind enemy lines to silently eliminate a single human target without risking immediate detection. By 1941, Winston Churchill had authorized the creation of a secret organization tasked with igniting rebellion across Nazi-controlled Europe. The Special Operations Executive was responsible for sabotage, espionage, and support of resistance movements stretching from France to Norway, from Holland to the Balkans. Agents were landing by parachute into darkness, carrying radios, explosives, forged documents, and very little that could kill discreetly. Knives demanded physical strength and proximity. Garrots required precise positioning. Poison was slow, uncertain, and often impractical. Conventional firearms were disastrously loud. In cities teeming with soldiers, police, and informants, a single audible gunshot could doom an entire resistance cell within minutes. Suppressors existed, but they were crude and ineffective by modern standards. Even the best suppressed weapons of the early 1940s produced sound levels comparable to heavy industrial machinery. A suppressed Sten gun still thundered at roughly 130 decibels. Suppressed pistols hovered near 120. These were not silent weapons by any meaningful definition. They merely softened the blast enough to make it less distinctive. Any sentry within a short distance would still hear it. The SO needed something radically different. A firearm that could kill without announcing itself. A weapon that could be fired indoors, in crowds, even at close quarters, without alerting anyone nearby. It had to be compact, simple, reliable, and nearly soundless. On paper, the specifications bordered on fantasy. Responsibility for this impossible task fell to a small development group operating under extreme secrecy at Station 9 of the Inter-Services Research Bureau in Welwyn Garden City, north of London. The lead figure was Major Hugh Reeves, an engineer rather than a traditional weapons designer. His team approached the problem not from the perspective of ballistics alone, but from acoustics. To eliminate a sound, one must first understand its sources. Every gunshot produces noise from three distinct mechanisms. The first is the violent release of propellant gases at the muzzle. The second is the sonic crack created when a bullet exceeds the speed of sound. The third is the noise of the weapon's own moving parts. If a truly silent firearm was to exist, all three had to be addressed simultaneously. The team began with the bullet itself. Standard 9mm ammunition leaves the muzzle at roughly 350 meters per second, supersonic at sea level. Even if the gases were perfectly suppressed, the bullet would still generate a sharp crack in flight. The solution was deceptively simple. Slow the bullet down by reducing the powder charge of standard 9mm cartridges. Muzzle velocity was lowered to approximately 290 meters per second, safely below the speed of sound. At that velocity, the projectile traveled without producing its own acoustic shockwave. This alone eliminated one entire component of the gunshot's audible signature. Next came the weapon's mechanical noise. Semi-automatic pistols rely on a moving slide to eject the spent cartridge and chamber the next round. That movement is audible even in otherwise quiet environments. The well rod eliminated this by rejecting semi-automatic operation entirely. Instead, it used a manual bolt mechanism actuated by a curled knob at the rear of the weapon. After firing, the operator manually extracted the spent casing and loaded the next round. This made the rate of fire slow, but it reduced the mechanical sound to almost nothing. In a weapon intended for single, deliberate shots at close range, speed was irrelevant. Silence was everything. The final and greatest challenge was suppressing the gases themselves. When a bullet leaves the barrel, the hot, expanding gases behind it explode outward, creating the familiar muzzle blast. The Wellrod's designers solved this by making the suppressor an integral component of the weapon rather than an external attachment. The front two-thirds of the pistol consisted of a carefully engineered series of expansion chambers and baffles. As the bullet traveled forward, the propellant gases were diverted into this internal maze, where they expanded, gradually, cooled, rapidly, and slowed dramatically before escaping into the open air. By the time they emerged, their pressure and temperature had been reduced to a fraction of their original force. The results were unprecedented. A conventional 9mm pistol produces roughly 160 decibels at the muzzle, loud enough to cause instant permanent hearing damage. The Wellrod produced approximately 73 decibels, a sound level comparable to a closing car door. At moderate distance, especially in an urban environment, its report blended seamlessly into background noise. In practice, many victims never realized a firearms had been used at all. They simply collapsed. Visually, the weapon was as unconventional as its operation. It measured about 14 inches in length. The grip was little more than a rubber-wrapped cylinder housing a 6-round magazine, later increased to 8. There was no trigger guard, only a small, curved trigger protruding from the underside. The barrel extended from the front like an exposed piece of plumbing. Sights were rudimentary because they scarcely mattered. The effective range was roughly 23 meters, but most engagements occurred at far closer distances. The Wellrod was not a sniper's tool. It was a contact weapon intended for stairwells, bedrooms, offices, and cafes. Full production began in late 1942 under strict secrecy. Even today, the total number manufactured remains uncertain, with estimates ranging from fewer than 3,000 to more than 14,000 units. Serial numbers were deliberately scattered, and documentation was minimal. Many records were destroyed by design. The weapon's first confirmed operational use occurred in early 1943, when SO agents began receiving them through clandestine supply drops into occupied Europe. The reception among resistance fighters was immediate and profound. In France, the Maquis used Wellrods to conduct what they grimly referred to as executive actions. German officials, known for brutality toward civilians, began to disappear without gunfire. Collaborators who betrayed underground networks were found dead in rooms where no struggle had been heard. The weapon made possible assassinations in public settings that would have been unthinkable with any other firearm. In one Paris operation, a target was eliminated in a crowded cafe. The assassin exited through a room full of patrons, drinking and talking normally. The body was not discovered until minutes later in Denmark. Resistance groups relied heavily on the weapon in urban operations against informants and Gestapo assets. The silenced shots allowed actions in daylight without triggering immediate crackdowns. In Norway, the well rod proved invaluable during sabotage missions in mountainous terrain and coastal installations. Guards could be removed quietly, allowing demolition teams to move into position without alerting patrols. In such scenarios, the few seconds of confusion following a silent kill often meant the difference between success and capture beyond its physical effect. The well rod produced a powerful psychological impact. German occupation forces gradually understood that the absence of gunfire did not guarantee safety. A quiet room could be just as deadly as a battlefield. Informants became harder to recruit, as it became clear that betrayal could lead to sudden, soundless death, without warning and without witnesses. The weapon introduced a new form of terror into the occupied territories: violence without noise, danger without signal. When compared to the secret weapons developed by other nations, the well rod stood alone. German suppressed pistols were typically standard service handguns fitted with detachable suppressors. The Walther PPK, for example, could be equipped with a screw-in suppressor that reduced sound to approximately 115 decibels. That was quieter than an unsuppressed shot, but still unmistakably a gunshot to anyone nearby. German suppressor design focused more on reducing shooter visibility than enabling assassination in public spaces. The Americans produced the high standard model D for the Office of Strategic Services. Chambered in .22 caliber, it achieved sound levels near 90 decibels and was widely regarded as quiet. However, its small cartridge significantly limited its stopping power, particularly against targets wearing heavy winter clothing. Multiple shots were often required to guarantee incapacitation. By contrast, the well rod's subsonic 9mm round delivered far greater terminal effectiveness while remaining substantially quieter when compared purely by acoustic output. The difference was stark. The well rod achieved approximately 73 decibels with a 9mm projectile. The American HDM hovered around 90 decibels, with a 22 German suppressed pistols rarely dropped below 115. In the stark mathematics of silent killing, the British design existed in a category entirely its own. The weapon was not without limitations. Its integrated suppressor relied on rubber wipes that sealed around each bullet. These wipes gradually degraded with use and had a limited service life before replacement was required. Accuracy, while adequate at close range, declined beyond short distances due to the reduced muzzle velocity. The manual bolt mechanism limited rate of fire, making the well rod unsuitable for extended engagements. But none of these disadvantages mattered in the role it was designed to fill. The well rod never became a standard issue sidearm, and it was never intended to. It was a surgical instrument, issued only when absolute stealth was required. Many agents carried it as a last resort tool, a weapon reserved for moments when escape depended on removing a single obstacle without attracting any attention at all. After the war, it slipped quietly into obscurity, its story buried beneath layers of classification and post-war silence. Today, surviving examples rest behind glass in museums or locked inside private collections, still looking more like plumbing than precision engineering. Yet their legacy is vast. The well rod proved, for the first time, that a truly silent firearm was not a theoretical concept but a practical reality. Its design principles influenced suppressed weapons for decades to come. More importantly, it embodied the strange logic of the Shadow War, where victories were measured not in conquered territory, but in targets removed without a sound, in the fog-shrouded streets of occupied cities, where every footstep carried risk and every whisper could be lethal. The well rod became the quietest voice of British resistance. It did not roar. It did not announce itself. It simply ended lives, silently, and vanished back into the darkness.